Good evening. I'd like to call the Portland Board of Public Education Business meeting to order. It is Tuesday, August 4th, 2020, and the Board of Public Education is meeting virtually through Zoom, while four school board members are meeting in person in central office on Cumberland Avenue. May I please ask the superintendent to call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Atkinson?
Here.
Mr. Balfons?
Here.
Ms. Bondo?
Présente.
Mr. Burke?
Here.
Ms. Figdor?
Here.
Ms. Morioni?
Here.
Ms. Thompson?
Here.
Ms. Trevorrow?
Here.
Ms. Brown? Mr. Casiel Reyes? Ms. Habibzai? Mr. Parrott? Ms. Yangala? And Chair Rodriguez.
Presente. We're going to have the flag on the screen, so we do our Pledge of Allegiance. All right. I'll wait for the flag. Will everyone please join me on the Pledge of Allegiance?
Roberto, we can't hear you at all. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? A little bit. Let me get through the Pledge of Allegiance, and then I might just get off the headset. All right. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America,
And to
and to the republic
for which it stands,
one nation,
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Are you able to hear me? Good. Good. All right. I'm going to go headset free for now. Let's see here.
Roberto, I have a quick question. I'm sorry. We're almost at 400, and I know that our limit is 500. Is that a Zoom limit, or is that's a Zoom limit?
Yeah, I understand. I understand our
Okay.
capacity for Zoom is 500 participants.
Oh, it is. Okay. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
All right. For the chair remarks, just want to take a few moments and share a few things with the public and with my fellow board members. First of all, tonight the school board returns to work after our annual break from business for the month of July. Over the last month, some board members and the education cabinet read and reflected on the book How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. And now I'm working with the superintendent to arrange for the board and cabinet to participate in the Race in America course that many of our teachers and staff have taken over the last couple of years. These are simple steps that we're taking together as a board and administration to build our individual understanding of systemic racism and what anti-racist policy might look like. It will help us build collective language and efficacy in the belief that we can change the systemic racism that is part of our school system. I am grateful for the board's engagement in this work and the opportunity that we have to hold spaces together for these important and difficult conversations. But first things first, tonight's business. The main event on tonight's agenda, a first read to approve the proposed 2020 and 2021 school reopening plan. Although the board was not directly involved in the day-to-day work to prepare for this plan, we have been kept in the loop of the process. We've been reading diligently various articles, asking questions, fielding questions from parents, students, friends, and family. Emails have been flowing steadily for the last couple of weeks, and of course, social media has been flooded with school reopening threads and comments. Needless to say, this topic has everyone's attention, and rightly so. What is interesting and important to note are the many varying points and positions that are represented across our district. Later on tonight, during our public comment, and I'm sure during the presentation, we will hear many of these, at times competing, positions and explore them as best as possible. I won't say much right now about those different positions and considerations people are bringing into this conversation, but I did want to speak on something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about lately. Public schools are constantly, unfairly, being asked to manage society's greatest flaws. Most people joining us tonight are well aware of the ever-expanding role schools play in society. Schools do so much more than teach curriculum. They feed the hungry, they address disabilities, they provide safety and security for children, and so much more. And now, they have to manage a pandemic. Once again, under-resourced and while constantly being scrutinized by everyone. Clear in what a lot of our constituents, what a lot of our staff, what educators across the country, and leadership across the district are saying is that we all have a different expectation of childcare so that we can go to work.
Roberta, I think your audio just got up.
I think I muted myself and that caused him to go mute. So you're actually feeding through my...
The underlying conversation that we need to have is about the expectations that we have for our public schools. And as we reimagine how we're going to open school in the fall under these circumstances, I hope that we keep in mind exactly what our expectations are. And do we share those expectations with the rest of our community? And is the plan that we're going to discuss tonight address your expectations as a member of our school community? I look forward to hearing the superintendent and his team speak tonight. I look forward to hearing the board members ask questions and get clarification on this plan. And I certainly look forward to hearing from our community members as they react to what we're going to be discussing. I think I'm going to cut it short here and hand it over to the superintendent for his remarks. And again, I'll look forward to our conversation later tonight. I don't think people will hear.
They can hear you through mine. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to begin my comments today by recognizing the original inhabitants of the land on which our city and schools stand, the Maliseet, Micmac, Penobscot, and Passamaquoddy tribes, known collectively as the Wabanaki, or people of the Dawnland. We are honored to have their children among our students today. Today, as you heard, is the first board meeting of the 2021 school year. With this meeting, I begin my 5th year as superintendent of the Portland Public Schools. I'm grateful every day for the privilege of leading this amazing school district in this amazing city. I'm grateful for the ongoing support of the board and all of our gifted Portland Public Schools staff, our people. We have amazing students, caring families, and committed partners. In these incredibly trying times, I'm reassured that it will be our teamwork that gets us through the challenges ahead. Our first example of this, I would like to thank the voters of Portland for overwhelmingly supporting our FY21 budget. In a year that saw large turnout as our election coincided with the primary and other important ballot initiatives, it was gratifying to see a 6-to-1 spread in support of our budget. Starting tomorrow, Portland Public Schools Class of 2020 will celebrate their graduation. As you know, we postponed graduations in June to see if by August we would be able to do so in person. This was the overwhelming choice of students when they were surveyed in the spring. Although our hopes for a traditional in-person graduation were thwarted, we're doing the next best thing by providing for a drive-in commencement. Tomorrow, our Portland High School's 199th graduating class will kick off the festivities at 6 p.m. at Ocean Gateway. Deering will be on Thursday at 10 a.m. in the morning and Casco Bay at 6 p.m. also on Thursday. I would like to recognize the creativity and hard work of everyone involved in the planning process, including our administrative team, our counselors and class sponsors, our parent organizations, and the City of Portland for making the space available and providing tons of logistical support. It is this teamwork, creativity, and resilience that keeps me hopeful in these challenging times. Today's agenda is a heavy one to start the year. The central topic is my recommendation for how to restart the school year in the midst of this life-altering pandemic. We're meeting via Zoom, although some of us are gathered in person, while maintaining physical distance, trying to keep our masks over our nose, and adhering to the other required precautions. Just preparing for this small gathering has highlighted for me how different things are. All of the preparations that have gone into making this as safe a space as possible is a sobering reminder of what we are looking forward to as we move to reopen our schools. We will be spending the bulk of our meeting on this topic, and I would like to outline some key points that I hope will govern how we all approach this conversation. First, as I mentioned, we're in a pandemic. None of us wants to be in this situation. None of us chose to be in this situation. The scenarios, the choices we are discussing are the direct result of this pandemic. As such, none of them are ideal choices. Everything that we're tackling is an exercise in making the best decisions we can with the information that we have. But make no mistake, if we had the choice to not have to make those decisions, everyone here today would choose that without a doubt. Second, nobody here wants to make a bad decision. We've seen over and over through these past few months that information changes and evolves. The decisions we make today are informed by the information that we have today. We must be prepared for those decisions to be modified as new information becomes available. Third, we must assume that we're in this together and that we all have the best intentions in our decision making. We're balancing difficult and sometimes conflicting interests, but we should not assume that those interests that we do not share are bad. We have different lenses, we have different vantage points, and we need to listen intently and evolve our thinking through those discussions. And last but not least, we need to recognize the trauma that is involved in this situation. As I've watched our team working through since last March to figure out how to make the best of the situation, I've seen amazing acts of strength and resilience. But I've also seen the marks and the signs of the incredible disruption to our lives that has been visited upon us by this pandemic. Every single one of us has suffered those disruptions, some clearly more than others, but all of us have. And it's important that we recognize and center in trying to support each other through these disruptions and the trauma that goes with them. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Superintendent. I guess I should check the audio. Can everyone hear me? Can you hear me now?
No, you too low. We can barely hear you.
They're hearing this from me.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I guess I can try to speak up a little bit louder and see if that makes a difference. Go there, Sarah. I don't think Sarah can hear me. I don't think some people can hear me.
You want to log out and log back in?
Yeah, I was going to ask Anna if she mind wearing on 5 faces.
And Anna, would you be able to take over chairing until Roberto logs himself out and logs himself back in? Just approval of minutes, I think, would be great.
Sure, let me pull up the agenda here. Okay, so we're on report of the secretary. Consideration and action to approve the meeting minutes of June 30th, 2020. Is there a motion? Ms. Morioni, seconded by Ms. Bigdor. And are there any questions on the motion? Seeing none, I guess we can go to public comment. Is there any public comment on the meeting minutes? I do see some attendees with their hands raised, and just a reminder that this is comment on the meeting minutes. So I have one hand went down. I have a Bobby, they both went down. So that will conclude public comment on meeting minutes, and I'll call for any board discussion. Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of approving the meeting minutes, do we do this by voice?
Roll call.
Okay, so I'll call for a roll call.
Mr. Atkinson,
Yes.
Mr. Balfons,
Yes.
Ms. Bondo,
Yes.
Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Ms. Figdor,
Yes.
Ms. Morioni,
Yes.
Ms. Thompson,
Yes.
Ms. Trevorrow,
Yes.
and Chair Rodriguez.
Yes.
And it sounds like Chair Rodriguez may be back with us.
I think I am. Can you guys hear me now?
Then.
Perfect. But the headphones did work. Thank you, Mr. Barrow, for picking up my slack there. So we approved the minutes. Next, consent items. Will the superintendent please read the list of donations made to the district?
We don't have any donations for this meeting.
Thank you. And so we're, excuse me. So we're in Board of
Educational Issues, which is
our main presentation tonight. But I wanted, before we get started, ask the board if we can take a couple of items out of order. There are a couple of personnel items deep into our agenda. I'd like to get those out of the way because some of the individuals that are listed for our approval are present tonight, and I'd like to spare them the potential long evening before we get to this. So if I kind of see nodding across the board here and then on the computer screen. So we're going to move to personnel items. First, we have consideration and action to approve the the personnel items listed. Election of administrators. Is there a motion? Ms. Figdor, second by Ms. Thompson. Will the superintendent please speak to the motion?
Yes, I'm going to ask Mr. Townsend, Assistant Superintendent Townsend, to speak to the administrators.
I am excited. I am finding all of our wonderful new administrators. So we're excited tonight to introduce 3 new members of our administrative team to the Portland Public Schools community. All 3 of them have been connected to Portland Public Schools in one manner or another in prior years. So we're excited to have them join us, in their new capacities. So the first one I would like to introduce is I would like to introduce Ms. Joanna Frankel. Ms. Frankel is going to be the new assistant principal at Rowe Elementary School. Joanna comes to us from serving in the past 5 years as the coordinator for teaching and learning at the Fiddlehead School of Arts and Sciences in Gray. Prior to that time, she spent 15 years as a pre-K to 5 classroom teacher in classrooms in Maine, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania. So we're excited to have Joanna come to us in this leadership capacity. She's been a Portland Public Schools parent and active PTO member for the past number of years. So excited to have her all in on Portland this year. So first, Joanna, I think I have you set up to be able to talk for a moment if you want to say just a quick word.
Love to. Thanks. But my camera doesn't seem to be on. Is that... Well, anyway, I'll talk to you without my camera on. Thank you so much, Erin, and I'm just thrilled to be joining Portland Public Schools as assistant principal at Rowe. I've stood in front of many of you on the school board in the past in my role as parent and advocate for equity in our buildings and for our opportunities for students in our district. And I'm really excited to be joining as an employee now. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Joanna. We're excited for your leadership and continuing to grow the school community at Rowe Elementary. The second new administrator I'd like to introduce tonight is Mr. Lance Johnson. Lance will be stepping into the big shoes at Portland High School as our co-curricular director, joining the Portland High administrative team and helping to lead, an incredible program of after-school, athletics and co-curriculars there. So Lance, as many people may know, has been with us really for much of his life. He comes from a Bulldog family, himself as a Bulldog, and has been working at Portland High for the past 25 years in a variety of roles, most recently teaching in the math department. He has significant experience in the world of athletics, both at Portland High and then most recently as head football coach at Scarborough High School, and has worked closely with athletic administrators across the region. That really positions him well to step in and pick up the momentum that Mr. O'Leary created over the past number of years at Portland High. So welcome aboard, Lance. We're glad to have you as part of the team in this new capacity, and appreciate all of your years here in Portland Public School, and look forward to the next number in this role. So would like to give you a chance to say a word or two if you'd like.
Thank you, Aaron. I'd like to thank the school board, Superintendent Batana, and Ms. Jepson for this opportunity. I feel strongly about the importance of educational co-curricular activities. When school activities, clubs, and sports become an extension of the classroom, they become very powerful influences in the lives of high school students. Co-curricular activities can change and save the lives of our students. Our goals are to extend these opportunities to every student in Portland and to be a presence and positive influence in our communities. I'd like to thank everybody for the opportunity. I'm eternally grateful for it, and I can't wait to get to work with our staff and our admin and our students, hopefully.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Lance. Looking forward to it. And the third administrator I'm excited to introduce tonight is Ms. Sarah Rubin. Sarah is joining us as the new assistant principal at Lyseth Elementary School. Forming a powerful combo there with Ms. Williams as an administrative team in a wonderful school community. So Sarah comes to us from the past 13 years as a teacher and teacher leader in Gorham, where she was instrumental in that district's equity work, helping to found their district's civil rights team with students and leading a number of initiatives at the district level to promote their equity agenda in Gorham. So we are super excited to bring those experiences to help us continue on our path in furthering our equity goals. Outside of her experiences at Gorham, she has had a long history and relationship and leadership experience with Seeds of Peace, who I think we're all familiar with as a really important contributor and collaborator with many of our students and staff in the district, playing multiple roles there, including camp director. And she's also had a few other Portland Public School connections in having been a competitive swimmer at one point and supported the Deering swimming team. And she as well is preparing to welcome her eldest child into the Portland's public schools community. So we're excited to have Sarah joining us. And Sarah, turn the floor over to you for a moment for a quick word.
Hi, thank you so much, Aaron. I'm so excited to be joining Portland Public Schools as an administrator. I'm really looking forward to working with Lenore at Lyseth and, of course, with the staff and the families at Lyseth, as well as the district administrative team, especially in the areas of equity. As Aaron mentioned, that's a big part of my background. And I'm so hopeful to be able to work to support all of our incredible students in Portland. And again, I just want to thank you so much for welcoming me into the district in this role.
Great. Welcome. So super excited to have these folks joining what's already a really talented team of school leaders in our district, and excited to continue to grow those ranks and with these additions. So thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.
So to vote, all those in favor of approving the personnel items listed, election of administrators, please indicate by roll call.
Mr. Atkinson?
Yes.
Mr. Balfons?
Yes.
Ms. Bondo?
Yes.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Ms. Figdor?
Yes.
Ms. Morioni?
Yes.
Ms. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Laro?
Yes.
And Chair Rodriguez?
Yes. So that's unanimous. Next, consideration and action to approve personnel items listed, election of probationary teachers. Superintendent, please speak to the motion.
I'm going to ask Ms. Stoddard to please speak to this motion.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We've been very busy in HR, and we continue to be very busy over the last month since we've been away. We are bringing forward a slate tonight of 33 new hires for your approval.
Thank you. Real quick, just a reminder to board members, if you have a question or a comment, please use the raise your hand feature on Zoom. I'm trying to keep an eye on that and manage a couple other things while I get comfortable away from my office. So just please use that. It'll help me keep track of the meeting better. So having said that, are there any questions on the motion?
Seeing none, any
more discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the personnel items listed, election of probationary teachers, please indicate.
Mr. Atkinson?
Yes.
Mr. Balfons?
Yes.
Ms. Bondo?
Yes.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Ms. Figdor?
Yes.
Ms. Morioni?
Yes.
Ms. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Terraro?
Yes.
And Chair Rodriguez?
Yes. All right, so now we're back to our board focus on educational issues. Superintendent, are you going to lead the presentation?
I am.
You have the floor. Thank you.
Okay, the Maine Department of Education's framework for returning to the classroom The Maine Department of Education's framework for returning to classroom instruction requires that the school board approve the school district's plan for hybrid or remote instruction. In mid-July, the Maine Department of Education issued a preliminary framework document requiring that school districts have school plans that would allow for all remote learning, a return to all in-person instruction in hybrid scenarios, blending in-person and remote learning. The DOE guidance indicated that beginning in late July and bi-weekly thereafter, the DOE, in partnership with the Maine Centers for Disease Control, would issue a health status for all counties to guide the decision-making of local boards. The guidance is non-binding and must be combined with meeting another set of 6 health and safety requirements: symptom screening at home before coming to school, physical distancing in facilities. Adults must maintain 6 feet of distance from others to the extent possible. Maintaining 3 feet of distance is acceptable between and among students when combined with the other measures outlined in this list of safety requirements. 6 feet of physical distancing is required for students while eating breakfast and lunch, as students will be unable to wear masks at that time. Face mask coverings for adults and students age 5 and above. Masks are recommended for children ages 2 to 4 when developmentally appropriate. Hand hygiene, personal protective equipment, and return to school after illness protocol. Since June, district staff have been working on and seeking input on various approaches to reopening school for the 2021 school year. The design team convened in early June to develop a framework for reopening schools. This team involved a representative group of educators and a board member. The design team arrived at a set of options aligned with the DOE requirements, including options for remote learning and hybrid return to school options. In late June and through July, 20 work groups coalesced and developed detailed recommendations, plans, and protocols in a number of areas, ranging from aspects of the instructional experience to plans for adapting facilities, transportation, food service, and other areas. The work involved collaboration among over 100 educators and also drew in community partners and used inputs from parents in the planning process. On July 24th, The district's work groups substantively completed their design work, which was summarized in a letter to parents on that day. As scheduled, the first Maine CDC DOE county-by-county color designation was presented on July 31st. Under that designation, Cumberland County is designed as green. Based on that information and our assessment of the district's ability to meet the 6 health and safety requirements outlined by the state, I'm prepared to make a recommendation tonight. So tonight's presentation will involve a detailed explanation of our process, options, and recommendations. Along with me, Assistant Superintendents Malia Nally and Aaron Townsend, Communications and Community Partnerships Executive Director Grace Valenzuela, and Executive Director of Human Resources Barb Stoddard will all present aspects of our plan. I would like to take a moment to thank the many people who have given tirelessly of themselves to pull together all of the many threads that are woven into our presentation tonight. And we will also recognize them by name at the end of our presentation. So with that, I'm going to shift to presentation mode, and I believe everybody can see the presentation right now. So Aaron, are you driving this? Can you, if you are, can you go to the next slide? Yeah, great. So those are our goals for tonight, is to provide the details around our back to school plans, talk about our planning process, talk a little bit in more detail about the return to school framework and the state's return to school framework and the county data report that we received, then present the recommendation for a back to school plan, and then engage in question and answer with the board. Next slide. So as a result of the work of our team and the design team, these are the guiding principles that have been used by all of our teams as they went through making their plans. So trying to center all of our work around our equity commitments as a school district, front and center, and then obviously ensuring that what we do prioritizes the safety of students, families, and staff, and then centering around the overall wellness of students and, you know, in connection with our whole student goal, making social emotional safety an important part of what we do. I mentioned in my introductory remarks the ability to adjust as we move forward, knowing that our context will change throughout the year. And then, you know, increasing the consistency of our practice, regardless of which mode we are in, is something that has driven the guiding the guiding process. And then looking at this as an opportunity to actually grow our sense of community and our collective efficacy as we work together to ensure that we do all of the things that are a part of those guiding principles. Next slide. So our planning process, as I walked through, involved the design team in June, which then led to our work groups that have really done the heavy lifting around all of the different aspects that we are going to talk about today. Alongside that, we've obviously worked to understand and to help develop the Maine DOE framework, and also to stay in constant communication and achieve coherence also with other area school districts. And continue, as the process has been ongoing, continue to get feedback from parents and staff, both through a series of focus groups and a survey, which we will detail in a couple of minutes. Next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about just those things that informed our decision making. We did a survey back in May of parents, and that had over 2,000 respondents. And that was primarily focused around two aspects. One, how did parents experience our transition to remote learning? And then also at that early juncture, where were people in terms of thinking about a return back to school? So you can see here that there were, there were some concerns. I know that that the parent feedback was that they recognized the hard work that went into making that transition with such little warning, and we're very grateful for the support that they received from our teachers and staff during that time. But overall, they felt that it was that there was definitely improvement that could be made in terms of our online, our remote learning experiences. And then at that time, we had 60% of the respondents say that they planned to send their children back to school, and only 2% that ruled it out sort of just outright without knowing. The majority, not the majority, but somewhere in the neighborhood of 35% were somewhere in the middle. So they had not ruled it out. They had not committed to it. They wanted to see what what it would look like. So exactly what we're presenting today. Next slide. And so we also surveyed our staff. We had, about 800 staff who responded to a survey where we asked, in that particular case, a different two set of questions. The first one was about the sustainability of our remote work. And at the time, roughly 50% of our respondents agreed or strongly agreed that it was doable, or they were either neutral or that it was doable to maintain that level of work. And then we also asked them about their dispositions, their thoughts about coming back to in-person instruction. And at the time, we had about 60% said yes, they would be coming back. 30-some% were undecided. We had a small number of folks at the time knew that they would need an accommodation if we came back. And we had about 10%, between that and saying that they were not comfortable coming back to work if the public health officials indicated that it would be safe to do so. So, and we will come back to this in a minute as we will talk about more recent information that we got from our staff. So that was part of what helped inform the work of the design team and subsequently our work groups. These are some generalizations that were distilled from a series of focus groups that we had with students, with parents, and with staff members. And some of those generalizations are, you've seen them already reflected in the principles that I outlined at the beginning, things like consistency and clarity in both learning expectations and student feedback, a more consistent schedule that is that tends to and is responsive to the schedule of working parents and their needs for safe childcare for their young ones. The recognition that we need to think about the family unit in the design. That comes into play with things like sharing devices, multiple schedules that that overlap with each other and that make it hard for families to be able to tend to the needs of their students. Prioritize support for students who are in need of special education services or who need intensive English language. And then to leverage peer groups for academic and social emotional support, to prioritize getting students together with each other as a way to support each other both academically and social emotionally. And, a desire to see the after-school programming and co-curricular activities play a prominent role in whatever it is that we moved forward with and then to leverage our community in the design. So those are some of the generalizations. So whether it was the things that we heard in common.
1 second.
We're getting a message that some of our hearing impaired viewers need to read the list. So,
you guys okay with that? Yeah.
Hang on.
Okay, Aaron, can I get the next slide, please? So that was the early feedback that we received, and then we've had additional feedback sessions. So last week we had 4 sessions with different parent combinations. So we had a focus group with our family engagement subcommittee, and we also invited leadership from Equity in Portland Schools to that conversation. We had a focus group with the PTO coalition, so the leadership of our various parent-teacher organizations. Portland Empowered hosted a meeting / focus group with their parent organizers and other community leaders. And then we also had an interpreted session with our multilingual families that was facilitated by our multilingual department staff. And so some of the feedback that we got from that was that in general, people understood the options as we outlined them and appreciated the opportunity to provide us feedback on them. I think across the board that folks understand the many challenges associated with any of the options that we are that we're looking at. There are a lot of questions about the level of our ability to sort of follow through and implement the safety precautions that are required. Things like the enforcement of masks, the enforcement of the symptom checks. And also concern that we try to use Portland-specific data to make decisions rather than county. And I think that that is sort of stemming from the reality that we know that there is overrepresentation of students and families of color in some of the COVID data. And so, urging us to look at that at a level that's deeper than what is provided by the state. And lots of questions about, things that we talked about in the, so sort of just recurring those same themes that we heard in the focus groups early on in terms of consistency, in terms of access to supports and activities. And then just, multiple perspectives on whether the folks in those sessions themselves would be comfortable with any of the options that were presented. And, I think that one of the themes was that there was appreciation and support for the idea that we would offer a choice of remote learning for anyone who wanted to take advantage of that. Next slide, please. We also had a listening session focus group with our instructional staff. We had about 320, I believe, participants at the apex of that session. And, the general sense of that is an overwhelming feeling of not feeling that we will be able to open safely. So, the specific, things underneath that I can highlight are, just wanting a higher level of specificity around the plans than what we were able to offer at that point. And so today we're going to try to do some of that, but I recognize that, some of it is actually seeing it in person and walking through those protocols. Around things like modifications to buildings and classrooms, again, consistent with the parents, the concerns about our ability to enforce the safety policies, face masks, symptom checks. What would we do when somebody doesn't follow those protocols? Concerns about the expectation of balancing both remote and in-person responsibilities. Questions about the timelines for making this decision of, that we're talking about today, and, also how and when would that potentially change, which we will also try to address today. And then just in general, obviously a very better understanding of what our timelines are and our procedures will be for making personnel decisions, granting leaves, things along those lines, assigning folks to remote instruction, and so on. So that's some of the feedback that we got from staff. We also did a poll at that same meeting. Next slide, please. Which sort of revisited the question that you saw earlier. So, would you return to school on site if public health officials indicated that it would be safe to do so? And you can see here the spring results and the results last week. There were many more confirmed no's and, significantly fewer yeses, as well as more people had, sort of already arrived at the decision that they needed to request some form of accommodation. We'll be talking about what that data looks like a little further in the presentation. And then we also asked if they felt more confident about the ability for us to reopen safely as a result of that discussion. And you can see the results are underwhelming, to say the least. 55% of the respondents did not feel more confident about the ability for us to reopen safely as a result of that conversation. 35% felt about the same, and just under 10% said yes or much more so. So I am humbled by the outcome of that poll. So, as many of you know, we also sent out back on July 24th a survey to families asking them if they intended to send their student back to school, and if not, what were their plans. And so we had 33% of families respond, so that's slightly over 2,000 respondents. And of the folks that responded, and let me just say that the assumption was that a no response assumes that they intend to return to school regardless of the scenario. So we actually were asking people to say, if you're not returning, if you're not planning to return, is it your interest to pursue remote learning, or are you just planning to withdraw? Obviously, this is not binding. People can continue to enroll in Portland schools after they hear the plan. They can, determine that they don't want to go to remote learning, and others can opt for remote learning along the way. So we don't feel that this is a final poll, but it is, just for our planning purposes to give us a sense of how many people would avail themselves of those options. And you can see that overall about 11% of respondents said that they were interested in remote-only learning for the 2021 school year. And about 4% said that they intended to withdraw, presumably to either homeschool or to enroll in a different schooling option. So next slide. I'm going to transition then to talk a little bit about the state guidelines and the framework that the state gave us back in mid-July. So as I mentioned during my remarks, this is, there are two aspects to it. One is the biweekly issuing of a CDC, Maine DOE COVID transmission data report card that will be updated. The first one we got last Friday, and as everybody knows by now, the entire state is considered green. In addition to the COVID transmission data report card, there is an expectation that in order to reopen for any in-person instruction, that there be certain health and safety parameters that are adhered to. And so those are things such as the symptom screening, the ability to physically distance and have facilities that are welcoming to students and mitigate for the spread of disease, masks and face coverings, hand hygiene, personal protective equipment, and protocols for when to quarantine, separate students or staff, as well as what the protocol is for having them return after an illness. And then I just want to underscore that even though this was, these are all requirements, and the red, yellow, and green designation is there for our use, it's intended to just be one tool for decision making by local boards. Thus, are putting this before you today as a recommendation that you will be expected to act on in the coming weeks. So it is not binding. We are not required, as a result of being green, to bring all students back to school. I know I've gotten emails to that effect, and I just want to be clear that that is not how the state has presented those designations. That's a guide. They've asked us to have a red, yellow, and green scenario. Green, which is the next slide. So, this is directly from the framework. The details around what the categorizations mean. So red suggests that the county has a high risk of COVID spread and that in-person instruction is not advisable. Green suggests that the county has a relatively low risk of COVID spread, and that with all of those other precautions in place, that it would be it could be appropriate for students to return to school on a full-time basis. And yellow is that there is an elevated risk of COVID spread, and that you could go either way, with either hybrid or with a remote plan under those circumstances. Next slide, please. And so, as I mentioned, here you have the actual designation where Cumberland, along with every other county in the district, is in the state is green. So, in response, next slide, please. In response to one of the concerns that I highlighted during the parent focus group, which was concerns about, well, can we look a little more deeply than just the county level information? We are going to walk through just some of the additional data that I think is important to take into consideration. So many of you, I know, have seen the heat maps in the New York Times on a variety of things. And last week they had a heat map for the entire country. And this is a zoom in on that map to Cumberland County, where the data from New York Times suggests that in a school of 500, that there would be, at this point, 0 people that would be likely to arrive in school with COVID on the first day. Obviously, that will change as time goes by, but that was on the day that it was published in late July. That was the outcome. You could also do this by schools of 1,000. You could do that by schools of 250. I chose the 500. Obviously, anything below 500 was also 0. 1,000 was that there would be one student who would be expected to arrive at school with COVID under those circumstances. So just to illustrate the sort of the bigger view, this is a capture of the overall map of the U.S. And you can see this, tracks with the data that we're all familiar with if we've been following any of the pandemic, where there are multiple outbreaks across the country, and the incidence is much, much higher in some of the Southwest and Southeast in particular. So you can see that with red being that in a school of 500, you would have, 10 or more students who would potentially be coming to school with COVID. So that's just to offer a little bit of a glimpse of where we compare nationally, and then just some additional data from the CDC, from the Maine CDC. So this shows the actual cumulative cases of COVID in the state since the early tracking, which is mid-March, to the present. And you can see, where the peak instances of the virus cases were identified in Maine and in Cumberland County. And so you can see that it was slightly earlier in Cumberland County than it was in the state. You can also see that the trend is, has been very positive statewide, and that includes Cumberland County. And then we went a little bit deeper and actually pulled from the CDC's website some additional data that is at the zip code level, and we looked at, each of the individual zip codes in Portland, so 04101, all the way through the island zips, and you can see that there are significantly higher numbers of cases in the mainland than there are on the island, and also that Portland overall represents, somewhere in the neighborhood of, I think 60% of the cases in Cumberland County. Just, and I have been trying to talk to Commissioner Lambrou about the cumulative rate, which I calculated, but it's just basically the result of dividing the cumulative cases by the population in those zips. And, I did this for all of Cumberland County, and our zips were number 1 and number 3 and number 5. So there were 2 other zip codes, 04105 and 04092, that were second and third in terms of the same rate. And, in general, you can see that the overall county rate is, 0.64% of the population has been infected at some point, and that is 1.5%. I also wanted to try to get a better sense of what that would look like at the national level from the commissioner, and that's they've promised to get back to me tomorrow. So that was all that we have for today around this. But so in general, you can see that the picture is not not as good in the city as it is in the county overall. And sort of what I really wanted to sort of probe a little bit deeper is, does this mean that, if you just looked at a county that was, 1.55, would that still be green, or would that then be yellow? So I will have an answer to that question in the near future. Next slide, please. So we're going to, go to the recommendation, and I know that everybody knows this because it's also a part of the memo. So what I'm recommending, based on all of the data that we have, and the questions that we still have, that we open school in a hybrid format for all, and we're going to get into the details of that in just a minute. And that as part of that we transition to in-person 5 days a week for pre-K through 5 by October 13th. So the reasoning behind that is to provide a window to just to see that we can be successful in keeping infections out with fewer students back before we transition into all of our pre-K 5 students back, and gives us time to solidify our practice. And I do want to be upfront about the fact that we do not believe, and we have a couple of slides on the community partners work that we've been engaged in, that I feel it's unlikely that we will have the capacity to provide community partners for remote days on day one. So, for our intent was to try to ensure that anybody who needed a daycare arrangement on the days that students are remote in our hybrid model, where they're with us for 2 days and remote for 3, that they would have a community partner. And we will talk a little bit more about what we think we can deliver, but it will not be uniform and universal at this point. And so next slide, Aaron, please. And I'm also recommending that we delay the start of the school year to September 14th, and that will be to allow us time to prepare for remote instruction at all levels. So, there is the possibility that at some point during the year, everybody will be in full remote, and clearly in our hybrid scenario, many of our students are remote for at least half of their time. So it's important that we actually do everything that we need to do to make sure that we have devices, that they're distributed, that our teachers have had an opportunity to spend time in professional development and doing the planning that they need to be able to do, to be able to execute on that, and also so that we can get those in-school routines and protocols that we've been developing actually in place with people familiarized with them. We would envision the week of September 8th doing some opportunities for students to come in different grades at a time, so that they would be able to experience what school was going to be like, sort of a test run of the school day in advance of that. And so I think with that, I am going to turn it over to, no, I'm going to continue, sorry. I want to talk a little bit about the assumptions that we outlined earlier that are also a part of being able to reopen for in-person learning. So these are the 6 categories that are a part of the state framework. So we're going to go through each of those one at a time. So for symptom screening, let me just talk a little bit about this. I think it's important to think about these not as discrete and separate, and each of them is infallible, but the way that the health professionals talk about this, and I think it's a helpful way to think about it, is that this is ultimately about layering those precautions. None of those is a fail-safe. There is inherent risk involved in everything that we will be doing for as long as the virus is present and there is no vaccine. So the idea with all of those precautions is to layer one over the other as a way to mitigate and reduce the likelihood of infection. And I think it's also important, next slide, to sort of think about compliance is not just, force, but rather to think about it from a public health perspective. And so that involves, teaching and instructing and helping people to understand the why, and all of us taking personal responsibility for, teaching and enforcing and complying with the multiple layers of precautions that are built in. So, compliance isn't, the superintendent walking in and, grabbing somebody who doesn't have their mask and escorting them out of the building. It's, making sure that people understand why mask wearing is important, and understanding and taking that learning and, sort of bringing it into their own personal framework for doing the right thing for themselves and others. So let's start with symptom checks. So as you know, we're required to have those daily symptom checks. We are in the process of, establishing an app that will, on a daily basis, remind families that they need to do the symptoms checks, and asks them to basically provide assurance that their child has none of those symptoms, that they, are not running a fever, are not coughing, don't have scratchy throats, have not been around anybody who has been has tested positive or is presumed to be positive for COVID, and so on. And, again, back to the public health approach, this is a family responsibility. This is something that, we do not have the bandwidth to do that at the school level when everybody walks in the door. So, in consultation with our chief medical officer and with our nurse supervisor, we've decided that this is a family responsibility. There will be a report that is generated of non-compliance, so where people have either not checked that they actually did this, there will be a report that's generated, and that will allow us to intervene at the school level when the student arrives, and ensure that they are that we do the checks with them and separate them until such time as we're able to ascertain that they are symptom-free. And this will be translated to all of our supported languages. Next, lots of facilities improvements that need to be in place. We have done a square footage analysis of all of our schools at the room level, and then principals and custodians have been doing individual school walkthroughs to identify places where we would be concerned about our ability to meet the physical distancing requirements. We are currently and will continue to look at the optimum access and exit procedures and have appropriate signage for that in each of our buildings. And that will be, again, in consultation with our facilities staff and with our medical staff to make sure that what we're doing is consistent with the best practice in these areas. We are in the process of working with partners to enable outdoor classroom spaces to be used to the extent possible, at times when it's appropriate to do so. We have currently installed plexiglass dividers throughout all of our offices and have the ability to do that at the desk and table level as people begin to look at what it would look like after we move forward and start operationalizing this. Where necessary, we have the ability to put up those dividers on desks and tables. And I did not mention this earlier, but we are also, even though this is not truly a facility adjustment, it is having a shorter school day is a way to reduce prolonged exposure to each other in enclosed spaces. And so, that is part of the rationale for having a shorter school day. Next slide, please. We also are making ventilation improvements. So our guarantee is that every classroom with outside access will have a way to allow fresh air in, either a window or a door. So today we signed the contract to have a large number of windows repaired at Portland High School, Deering High School, and Longfellow, so that we could, follow through on this commitment and make sure that every classroom that actually has a window has access to fresh air, so a window that opens. There will also be fans, and for those who are in this room, a similar setup to what we have in here today, where we have our windows open and we have a fan moving the air across the room and out the windows. We are in the process of procuring and installing ionizers in the duct work wherever that capacity exists. Not all of our schools have the type of air circulation that would lend itself to having ionizing units installed, but where we can, we will do that, and those are very effective at as they remove air from rooms, also eliminating the the impurities in the air, including viruses. We will have, for those small spaces where there is no windows, so many of our offices, many of our therapy rooms and things along those lines are in rooms that do not have windows that open to the outside. We will have air filtration and purifying systems, and where the fixtures allow for that, we will also install UV lighting, which as I don't understand it fully, but has a fan built into it that pulls the air through, and as it pulls the air through, it purifies the air by killing whatever is in the air. And we also have, we've already procured, or are in the process of installing those UV fixtures in our nurse's office and in the identified isolation spaces in each of our buildings. So face masks, as you know, under the state requirements, they are required for all students 5 and over, except for students where it's a health challenge or developmentally inappropriate to have them wear the masks. And in those cases, there would be face guards that could be used as an alternative to the to face masks. We will obviously provide face mask breaks at appropriate times and during meals, as obviously. And I just, back to this notion that we're all in this together. This is something that we really need to start practicing. We need to start practicing now, and it will be challenging. There's no question about it, and it will be challenging for adults, and it will be even more challenging for young children. So, I ask all of our families to help us by, not only teaching the why, but also getting people to practice, getting our children to practice wearing those masks so that they will have the resilience to be able to do that when they come to school. We will have both cloth, and for people who don't have their cloth masks, we will have disposable ones. I'll be talking a little bit about what the volume of the PPE that is currently procured looks like in a couple of slides. We will have specialized options for specialized staff, and I will also talk about that in our PPE order slide in a couple minutes. So next, please. Hand hygiene, as you know, that is an important part of mitigation, part of those layering strategies. So we will require hand washing when arriving at school, when leaving, and re-entering a space. So when, students go to the bathroom, when they go and return from the playground, things along those lines, those will be built in times to wash hands, as well as, building protocols around, hourly breaks if necessary for people to wash their hands and so on. In every classroom without a sink, we will have hand sanitizers dispensers that will be installed that will be used in lieu of the sink. And then, we, as again, consistent with this notion of this is a public health approach, teaching the why and teaching appropriate protocol. And again, something that I know that we've all been exposed to that now for 4.5, 5 months. So just to continue to do that at home and make sure that students understand why that is important, and then on our end, prioritizing that in our schedule. And so next, to talk a little bit about PPE, I'm not going to go into the details of all of this, but these are the different variations of personal protective equipment that is being furnished by the DOE. So I mentioned earlier that there was specialized equipment for different types of positions. So if if you want to take some time later to look at this and see what is being made available for whom, I think that would be, that's why this slide is here, so that everybody can see what you can expect to receive. And then the next slide is directly from the state's procurement spreadsheet, and it just basically shows you the current PPE order for PPS. So this is what we've either already received or expect to receive by the start of the school year. And there are a handful of these items that are on back order, like the N95 masks and things like that, but we have assurances that we will get them, before the start of the school year. But right now we have 11 pallets of PPE that has already been shipped and that we have sitting over in our warehouse area at Paths, ready for distribution to our schools. And last but not least, as I mentioned earlier, we've been working very hard with our school medical officer, with our head nurse, to develop protocols around all of the different, all of the different things, whether it's the daily symptom checks or the protocol for what to do when somebody is suspected of, having symptoms or confirmed to have symptoms. So those protocols are consistent with CDC guidelines, and as required by the state and by the CDC, CDC gets very involved in all of the decision-making around these situations. Many of you, I know, in the audience are part of the Deering community. As you know, today we had a presumed positive test for a staff member at Deering, and so immediately our staff began working with CDC and have followed all of those protocols, and we notified staff earlier today and are in the process of notifying students and families as well of that presumed positive. A lot of what we're doing is trying to limit the extent of the contacts to minimize the impact of a positive. So everything that we're trying to do, and the reason that we are opening the way that we're opening, and we will talk about some of the specific things, for example, around the high school hybrid model, are all really with an eye to trying to limit the impact of a positive case, so that we wouldn't have to close the entire school, but would, ideally identify just the right level of just the right level where we would need to close and disinfect and quarantine and take all of the appropriate steps. We've also been working with our partners at Greater Portland Health to establish the capacity for testing symptomatic individuals. So anyone coming to work who exhibits symptoms, anyone coming to school who exhibits symptoms, having the capacity to have those students or staff tested at Greater Portland Health at our expense in short order is something that we've been working towards. I know that a common refrain in some of the emails is, universal testing. As I think everybody understands at this point, Maine does not have universal testing. Maine is still doing presumptive cases in many instances where, just there's an assumption that is that's COVID. So we don't have the ability to universally test all of our students and staff on an ongoing basis. So that is what we are able to provide, and that is what we're moving forward proposing. And then I think that's it. And so I'm going to take a sip of water and turn it over to Aaron, I believe, to walk through the specific recommendations for the school reopening process. So, Assistant Superintendent Thompson.
Great. Thank you, Javier. So as the superintendent has indicated, the recommendation is to start the year in our yellow scenario. Based again on our desire, based on the data that he shared, to have the safest kind of reentry plan that we can. And, in that last point, in terms of really being able to slowly introduce students and staff back to our school environments and to maintain stable cohorts so that we're able to kind of grow our capacity to safely serve all students and staff. So I'll walk through a little bit of what the yellow scenario is specifically, and then additionally speak to a few of the details as it relates to our green and red scenarios. And then my part will conclude with sharing kind of what the updated recommendations are for school start and end times based on these scenarios. So for elementary school, as has been indicated, we are proposing that students return initially in a hybrid model in which all students would attend school 2 days per week for 5 hours per day, according to a regular schedule of what's been described as the ABXAB. So that would be students being assigned either an A cohort or a B cohort, and attending in person on Monday or Thursday, or Tuesday and Friday, and then learning remotely on the alternate days. Our goal, depending on the monitoring of the public health data and the growth of our capacity to effectively implement the health and safety protocols, would be to bring back all pre-K-5 students for 5 days per week at that same 5 hours per day by the middle of October. So this recommendation is based kind of in the recognition of the critical role schools play, in particular for our youngest students, in supporting our community in managing the challenges that we've heard clearly from families in terms of supporting them to be able to get back to work and do their, take care of their responsibilities. As is true for all of our students, that in-person interaction that we're seeking to make available for as many students as possible is critical for their social and emotional development. And our 5 hour a day recommendation here and at the middle school is in recognition that staff at these grade levels will be responsible in the hybrid scenario of supporting both their students in person and then needing some additional time to as well provide to make contact and provide support and feedback to students who are on the remote side as well. So that is one of the rationalizations for the 5 hour day. Additionally, we are looking, as the superintendent said, we continue to work with just an incredible group of community partners. And while we're not in a position to be yet to be able to offer care on the alternative remote days, we are seeking to grow the capacity to provide additional after-school care, recognizing that the 5-hour day is not quite a full school day, and that those demands for childcare still exist. So that is something we're continuing to work towards, and ensuring that there are options for families who would be interested in that for their children. For middle school, as we look at middle school, similarly, we are recommending that students return to school in a hybrid model for the first trimester. This will allow us to build capacity to serve students and initiate our learning cycle while we monitor the health and safety requirements, the health and safety context that we're experiencing. As in our elementary scenario, all students would attend school 2 days per week for 5 hours per day. Student cohorts would remain stable, and teachers would be rotating to minimize movement and transitions in meeting the state requirements around the stable cohorting and to support our health and safety practices. This recommendation really kind of hinges for our middle school grades on building on our teaming structure that exists at the middle school in order to be able to maintain those stable cohorts. So at all 3 of our middle schools, as we've talked about previously, the teaming structure is a core element of that, and that allows us to maintain consistent cohorts that don't have students mixing from period to period, and having a consistent group of students together so that we're able to, as the superintendent indicated, monitor and track, and in the case of anybody, any potential, positive, we're able to respond in a kind of targeted way, and with the specific individuals that potentially could be impacted. As well, in both of these scenarios, and I think, as is indicated here, but for all 3 grade spans, and Assistant Superintendent Nolly will speak to it later, we do have specific considerations for students in our district special ed programs, and for our English learners, particularly our newest English learners, who are what we refer to as our IELD students, who are just learning English. So in all of this yellow scenario, we have some specific, accounting for their specific needs. In addition, so moving to the high school plan, and as the superintendent indicated, that we've been responding to a number of questions around high school, and I'll say so. Our proposal. We'll first describe our proposal, and then speak to kind of the rationale behind it. So first, we are proposing that 9th grade returns in a similar fashion as I've described for elementary and high school, in which students would attend 2 days per week. And then would be remote for 3 days in that same AB model. For the 9th graders, and for all 10th and 12th graders, we're recommending that they begin the year learning remotely. However, for both 9th grade and the 10th through 12th grade, the high school day overall is a 6-hour day, in which we are recommending that the primary instructional blocks happen in the morning for about 3 hours each morning. For the 9th graders, again, that would be in person, and for 10th through 12th graders, remote. And then all students, 9th through 12th, would have the opportunity for small group academic and social emotional supports through the Learning Center model in the afternoons, where they're able to be able to get support around their coursework from their teachers, either in person or virtually. And that time also provides the time and space for advisory connections. It's referred to differently at all 3 high schools: crew, bulldog block, during coaching. As Assistant Superintendent Nolly will speak to, that was one of the primary recommendations coming out of our remote learning experience in the spring, was ensuring we had a consistent, specific point of contact for each student and family. And so we're excited about growing that capacity at our high schools, and continuing to develop it more deeply at middle school and elementary in the context of the classroom teachers. again, to speak to the rationale for this is, as we continue to learn about the science around this, recent reports have indicated that transmission among teens is, potentially similar to adults. So it has led us to be cautious. But then additionally, the challenges that a comprehensive high school presents, in terms of maintaining the state-required stable cohorts are significant in the 10th through 12th grade context. So we believe, both high schools, or all of our high schools focus on the 9th grade transition and do have teaming structures in place at 9th grade that will allow us, with some shifts and modifications, to be able to maintain those stable cohorts to protect student and staff safety. However, in the 10th through 12th grade, as we consider bringing those students back, they're in the comprehensive high school, as people have experienced, the students that somebody is with in their first period may be dramatically different than their second period, their third period, fourth period, and so forth. So we did not feel in beginning the year that we were in a position to be able to meet that state requirement of those stable cohorts for the upper grades. And the potential implication, as the superintendent indicated, is if we did have a positive test, we're not going to be able to respond in as specific a way because of the potential of transmission across broad numbers of students, because of the lack of those stable cohorts. So additionally, for families that are interested in considering the remote option, high school presents an additional challenge because of this, kind of specific credential and knowledge requirements for some of the courses and for some of the courses that students take. So being able to facilitate, which Assistant Superintendent Nally will speak to again in a moment, our remote learning option is challenging at the high school level to be able to find a calculus teacher or a specific chemistry teacher that will be available to support the remote learning students. Different than it is true at the middle school and elementary, where it is a bit more generalized and not quite as specific in terms of discipline. So being able to provide remote learning from the get-go in terms of 10th through 12 enables us to facilitate that and meet a wider range of needs than would be potentially possible if teachers were having, because we have heard clearly and are very concerned on behalf of teachers of having to manage, multiple different kind of cohorts of students. So recognize already the challenge for our middle school and elementary staff where they are managing in-person and remote cohorts at once. The Learning Center model, just lastly, I'll say, does build off of, and we feel confident around, continuing. The schools are working hard on building out that structure, but we have had support and intervention structures like this at place at all three high schools. It's been referred to again as different things as we do at our different high schools. The WIN block or Bulldog block is how it was referred to at the other two schools, X block at Casco Bay. And so we're seeking to kind of grow that intervention and support structure to be able to implement the Learning Center model for all students. And again, this, so what that means for our 10th through 12th graders is not that they won't have any in-person, but they have the option of being able to gain that in-person access through the Learning Center. But their courses, primary course delivery, will happen through the remote context. So I'll speak just briefly. So that is our, again, as the superintendent's indicated, the primary recommendation is opening in our yellow scenario. So we wanted to go into detail, much more detail about those scenarios and what the implications are starting school around that. Again, through the work from the design team, this spring and through the summer, we've developed additional details around the red and green scenario if we, have to, activate either one of those. So green certainly is moving towards, a return to normal school, but not quite there. So there we would be integrating all students back full time. And depending on the grade span, 5 or 6 hours a day. Again, 5 hours at the pre-K to 8, and then 6 hours at the high school. The challenge there is that we're still required to meet the state health and safety requirements around, all the masks and distancing stuff that the superintendent indicated, as well as maintaining the stable cohorts and our hygiene practices. So we'll, that is a potential challenge for us, but certainly, if the public health data indicates confidence in that, that's one of the directions we could go throughout the year. On the other end of the continuum is the red, which generally, is in the state framework, recommends remote learning for all. And so that is, the basis for our scenario here. So all students generally fully remote. We would continue, as in the yellow hybrid model, of having Wednesday as kind of a tier 2, which is an additional kind of support and intervention structure for students, as well as staff collaboration day. This was, as people are familiar with, we utilized this past spring. Based on the feedback from our remote learning experience, we have done a lot of work to improve the consistency of what the learning experience and schedules and kind of technology platforms would be. And that, stretches across scenarios, but certainly would be most evident, in the remote learning experience if we have to enact that scenario. And, in a few moments, Assistant Superintendent Nally is going to speak in more detail about some of those consistencies, in response to the feedback from the spring that our staff's been working hard on developing. Within that, one of those recommendations was trying to increase our ability to, reduce our reliance on screens particularly for our youngest learners in a remote scenario. So that's where you see the utilize physical learning materials. And lastly, and know that we've gotten some feedback on this, so we recognize that through the spring, even when we were in remote learning at that time, we recognized that there were many learners that were really struggling in that space. And so we would want to continue to entertain the option of a very limited opportunity, optional. Nobody would ever be required in that context to come in, both for staff and student, but we would want to continue to make available in a very limited context with enhanced health and safety requirements to make some level of in-person kind of learning center opportunities available for students who are really struggling. So that's a little bit of a shift in just being completely remote. And again, families and staff would always have the choice to remain remote in that context. Nobody would be required under that. But we did recognize, and that was part of the feedback, and believe that we could create a safe environment for a very small number of students if required. So those are the additional red and green scenarios that we may need to activate at different points during the year. My last kind of piece, is just the implications of what that means for school start and end time. So many of the health and safety requirements also impact the expectations around transportation. So part of the state guidance was in respect to transportation and the requirement for physical distancing on buses as well as other health and safety practices. So our transportation team has been involved from the beginning in trying to figure out how we would be able to manage transportation for students across the district within this context. So it is those kind of staggered schedules that's led to this recommendation to try and fit in the various runs that'll be required to get students to and from school. So here you can see the implications of that, which obviously is a shift, for historically in terms of Portland, where we really have our elementary school students in school earlier being picked up first. And again, that was in part designed with an eye towards childcare needs, so that we didn't have our youngest students at home if they have older siblings, and have our high school students out of the buildings. So what you see is their start and end times there, and then the high school end times, which are later than historically have been true, but we know also corresponds to some of the data around what works best for teens in terms of school start time. The last thing I'll say is just on this is that it does indicate, that need of what we're working towards that I mentioned in the elementary context of the need for, a strong after-school option for folks, because we recognize, that while it's an early start time, that means it's also an early dismissal time, and that the aftercare options will be important to be able to provide for families, in this yellow scenario, or in a green scenario in that case. So with that, I will turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Nolly to talk further about, the remote option, the full remote option, as well as many of the kind of district-wide consistencies that we're putting in place, and some of the special supports for some of our special populations to enable them to succeed.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Kind of building on that from what Assistant Superintendent Townsend was describing, we recognize that some families will not feel comfortable sending their child to school in our yellow or green scenarios. So we will offer a fully remote learning option for those families. We're going to run this as a district remote learning school for elementary and middle school. So this basically enables us to better match teacher expertise and student developmental stage and content areas together. So what that would mean is that students will be with peers who are also in the fully remote learning experience. So for example, if you're an elementary student, you might have a morning meeting experience with other peers who are doing full remote learning that are potentially from other schools, not necessarily from your home school. And then at the high school level, this will be managed within each high school. Assistant Superintendent Townsend spoke to this a little bit, that given the hybrid yellow scenario for high school, we're able to manage that locally within each high school more easily. So moving forward, so beyond the schedules we've discussed, the district's been working on a set of learning experience consistencies, which we envision getting implemented across any of our scenarios. The consistencies are responsive to the feedback we received from families and students and teachers. They help support smoother transitions in the case that we need to move in and out of remote, hybrid, and in-person learning, and they align with our enduring learning beliefs as a district. They were developed via a very collaborative effort that was launched with our spring planning team and was then further fleshed out with grade span specific work teams, as well as with specialized work teams such as a social emotional learning team, a special ed team, and an ELL team this summer. There's additional detail provided in the PDF, which is in board docs, and as a note, that is still in draft form and will be revised this week. But I want to highlight a few of these key concepts here. So first, we are going to prioritize our students' social emotional health. This experience has been incredibly hard for everyone and still is. While we know that the last 6 months has impacted families in different ways and to different degrees, we are all affected. This is not normal. And our plans acknowledge that and prioritize the social and emotional well-being of our school communities. We are following the guidelines from CASEL, which is a national leader on social emotional learning in schools. And that guidance includes prioritizing time for relationships and intentional social emotional learning, designing opportunities for adults to connect, heal, and build their capacity to support students, creating safe and supporting learning environments, and collecting regular feedback from students and families about their experiences. Part of prioritizing our students' social and emotional well-being is ensuring every student has a point person. So in elementary, this will usually be their teacher, but will sometimes be another educator based on the student's specific context and need. In middle and high school, students will have an advisor, and they'll be a part of a small advisory group. These point people will be explicitly monitoring students' academic, social, emotional, and overall learning and overall engagement. And they will also serve as point people for families reaching out on a weekly basis. In addition, the teachers or advisors will hold community meetings or advisory meetings multiple times per week. This will give students the opportunity for synchronous interactions with their teacher or advisor and peer group that are designed to build relationship, community, and engagement. In response to feedback and based on reflection, we also realized that our swift pivot into remote learning in the spring did not allow us time to realign our shared vision for a quality learning experience. So this next bullet speaks to the fact that we've spent the summer landing a set of consistent learning experiences that we'll expect all schools and teachers to integrate into the hybrid or remote scenarios. So an example of that includes the use of the daily class meeting at the elementary level, or the opportunity for student discourse and discussion with teachers and peers on a consistent basis every week. And connected to this is the intention to have a more consistent schedule to the day and arc to the week in the case of our fully remote learning. We're also working to prioritize the most essential standards across grade spans. This work fits with our ongoing efforts around proficiency-based learning, where our focus is on getting clear about the most essential learning that we want for our students and emphasizing depth over breadth. This includes making moves to facilitate interdisciplinary planning so that students are learning English language arts standards, for example, in the context of science content. We're also working on strategies to ensure all students are receiving regular, meaningful feedback in all scenarios, and with a focus on ensuring this happens when students are remote in either the hybrid or fully remote scenario. And finally, all schools will utilize the outdoors for learning as a part of the weekly rhythm. We're working with architects to create at least 2 outdoor learning spaces for each school. In addition, we're working with schools to consider informal spaces to do things like hold their morning meetings or advisory. We'll be offering professional development in collaboration with community partners and parents who have this expertise to help teachers learn strategies for managing instruction in an outdoor learning space. We recently surveyed teachers about their interest in utilizing outdoor learning spaces and received 230 responses, and of those who responded, 200 said that they were very interested in training on how to do this effectively. Our work groups also landed a set of consistent structures that are designed to enable a quality learning experience and to be responsive to the feedback themes from the spring. Specifically, we're utilizing a streamlined set of technology platforms. This will enable us to provide better professional development and support to teachers on how to maximize these tools, and will enable us to provide training and support to families in multiple languages. The goal will be to reduce the complexity of the platforms and programs students and families have to navigate in the remote setting, and to increase our capacity and support around a smaller set of tools. We're also establishing consistent protocols for attendance and engagement, and designing a centralized data system to better monitor student engagement so as to be responsive at the school and system level to student needs and trends. And we're designing a school kickoff experience that acclimates students to the new protocols, prioritizes relationships and building community, and intentionally eases students back into their school schedule. And finally, we're ensuring that all students will have access to physical learning materials for remote days and periods of time to enable learning that's not solely dependent on the use of technology. So if you want to move forward from there, thanks, Erin. And then, consistent with our central focus on ensuring the students furthest from opportunity are getting the additional support they need, we are prioritizing additional supports for students who are just learning English and new to the country, and students with IEPs. So specifically for students who are new arrivals or just learning English, we're providing the option to get additional in-school support in the hybrid and red models. So specifically in the hybrid model, these students would be included with their peers in A or B cohorts. On their remote days, they would have the option to come into school in person with a small cohort of other IELD students for sheltered language instruction with an EL teacher, and to receive support to complete their remote work with an educator, which could be a teacher in ed tech. In the case that we move into fully remote, we would provide a few learning centers, and Assistant Superintendent Townsend spoke to this, that would adhere to strict health and safety protocols, and will only be opened if we're confident we can achieve a safe learning environment to the students and staff who opt into them. We'll also be providing training and support around the use of technology, learning platforms, and health and safety protocols in students' home languages. In terms of special education, for students in district programs, we'll provide access to additional days of in-person learning in the hybrid scenario. This will be rolled out on a gradual schedule to ensure students and staff are able to manage the necessary health and safety protocols effectively. All other students receiving special ed services will continue to receive those services in any model. We'll make every attempt to deliver specially designed instruction and therapies in person, but in the case that it's not possible, we'll utilize remote learning platforms and teletherapy via the Zoom for Healthcare platform. So from here, I think I'm passing it to Grace to talk about the role of community partners.
So I think we might have lost Grace, and I'm going to step in for her here and
No, I'm here. I'm here, Barb. I'm just, I did forgot to unmute myself. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the City of Portland has a rich pool of nonprofit community-based organizations dedicated to advancing the arts, sciences, humanities, civic development, and physical and mental wellness. Many of these organizations are engaged in providing a diverse programming for children and youth of all ages. We are not only lucky to have many of them in our community, we are also fortunate that they are deeply committed, interested, and passionate about working with the Portland Public Schools and its students and families. To illustrate how committed and motivated our community partners are, we invited about 50 of these organizations to a meeting on a 3-day notice. We wanted to explore the potential for school community partnership to support the 3 possible learning scenarios. We were pleasantly surprised to get 65 people at the meeting. They were all eager to reach out and thankful to be invited to the partnership. I want to take the opportunity to appreciate their willingness to explore what could be an innovative way to support families with their childcare needs and to assist schools in providing activities that will enrich and engage students. Next slide, Aaron. At this time, we are looking at creating a small pilot for our first 4 weeks of school. To assist families with their childcare needs, the plan is to offer before, after school, and Wednesday programming for elementary schools, our priority age group. We also want to prioritize offering these services to children of our Portland Public School staff so that they are able to work. Please note that Community Partnership Work Group is still in the exploratory stage with our partners. And we asked them to complete a survey profile so that we know what programming they offer, how many hours a day, for what days of the week, how many students, what age group, and if they need transportation services, etc. The intent is to match them with a school that is in a geographical proximity to their location, which could potentially help us with transportation. Next slide. I'm also going to talk about family engagement and communications. It's another work group that I oversee. The Family Engagement Work Group reviewed the quantitative data from the parent survey conducted end of May, as well as the qualitative data generated from 5 family focus group sessions conducted in late May, early June. Major themes from these data sets include the following. Parents, particularly those who are essential workers, need consistent all-day care for childcare to allow them to go to work during the weekday. Families ask for consistency in tools and platforms used across the district. This will help them feel less overwhelmed and burdened by technology. Parents and guardians want to be able to support their children's academic work at home. They want some training and support to successfully assist their children with remote digital learning. Parents are aware that teachers are very busy. They don't want to unnecessarily burden them with frequent emails and want some structure for communication loop. Next slide, please. With these considerations in mind, the Family Engagement Work Group developed some recommendations to include the following. Hosting of family orientation sessions at the start of the school year to model safety protocols and expectations, development of video-on-demand technology, how-to sessions for parents and caregivers, conducting multiple opportunities for stakeholder feedback in different platforms and venues, development and dissemination of timely, consistent, and informative communications in various channels and to all stakeholder groups. This includes the development of a new website that is easy to update, which is necessary in a context when information is fast-moving and changing. And lastly, we The recommendation also includes leveraging our language access team at the Multilingual and Multicultural Center to reach families who need to get information in a language that they understand. And I'll pass the baton to our HR Director, Barb Stoddard.
Thanks, Grace. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the staffing considerations that we're facing as we move into the fall. First and foremost, protecting the health, well-being, and safety of staff and students is our highest priority for any reopening scenario. We're committed to following all the federal and state, local, and health and safety guidance around physical distancing, hygiene measures, and workplace configurations that you've heard about already. I'm going to share a little bit of information about staff requests for accommodations. What's important for people to understand is that the requests that are made are really unique to each employee and their personal circumstances. And the way that we approach this is addressing each request one at a time on a case-by-case basis, which is labor-intensive, but that's what's required for this kind of work. As you might imagine, we've received a large number of requests for different types of accommodations, and those requests are continuing to come in. So requests from staff, as you can see on the slide, from across the district for either an accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is the ADA, or for flexible work arrangements, the number is 180. That's how many we've received to date. This is about 14% of all of our regular staff in the district. There's about a 50-50 split between these two types of requests, those that fall under ADA and those that fall under a flexible work arrangement. Those that are requesting a flexible work arrangement also include two groups. It could be employees who themselves don't have a medical condition, but that they live with someone or they care for someone who does, or employees who have childcare issues. And again, within this flexible work arrangement group, we're split about half and half. So in terms of the requests that have come in, 73% or 132 of them are from staff who are covered by the PEA. Again, this includes classroom staff and specialists, so nurses, librarians, social workers, other folks within that bargaining unit that aren't classroom teachers. 57% are from classroom teachers, and these are spread across the district, roughly 40% at the elementary level and 30% each at middle school and high school. As you might imagine, these are not evenly distributed across building locations. So HR has a process to engage in dialogue with all employees who have submitted a request to us. Letters went out last week requesting medical documentation for employees whose requests are based on a medical condition for themselves that would likely be considered a disability under the ADA. We have a legal obligation to engage with these employees in a collaborative dialogue about what reasonable accommodations we might be able to put in place when they return to work this fall. For some staff in this group, the accommodation may be as simple as ensuring that Portland schools are following all of the CDC and DOE safety protocols related to physical distancing, face coverings, hand washing, PPE, etc. For others in this group, the final result could be a remote work situation or taking a leave of absence. As I mentioned earlier, for staff who fall into this second group and the two subcategories, the first requests are these folks who don't themselves have a disability, but they live with someone or care for someone who may have a disability or a risk factor. And similar to the group of employees who have an actual medical situation themselves under the ADA, we'll be engaging with this group of folks in the same way. We've prioritized the folks who fall under the ADA first, but we will be connecting with the second group of staff in the next few weeks. That other subcategory, which are the requests from staff who have childcare or daycare issues, the majority of these requests are still currently in the maybe category. And that's because there's so many unknowns about school reopening, both in Portland and in surrounding districts where our staff live. As the plans become finalized for us and other districts, these requests will become more clear. Some employees in this group may ask to work remotely, at least on certain days of the week, while others may ask for a leave of absence under the newly expanded FMLA option that's in place to deal with childcare issues. As you heard earlier, the Cumberland County superintendents have agreed to honor all requests from staff members who want to bring their children to the school district where they work. This option will help align the days of in-school and remote days for staff and their children. Also, as you've heard, the district is looking to create some wraparound care with community partners, allowing staff to be able to access that care for their children in one of these programs. We're also looking at the possibility of creating a staff-only district childcare program that would be potentially staffed with volunteers and some of our own students. So we're also seeing overlaps in all three of these categories. So people could have a situation where they have a medical condition themselves and they have childcare issues. So you can understand that this gets very complicated very quickly. These are really challenging issues, and it's a really challenging time. We're not unique in Portland. The issues that we see are being faced by all working families across the country. So here are just a few highlights of what we plan to do in terms of support and our strategy. Again, the superintendent's agreement that I just spoke about and access to childcare. Access to the employee assistance program at Anthem. All employees, whether they take our healthcare or not, have access to the EAP. There are options for leave. It could be paid sick leave that is guaranteed, as well as other kinds of leaves of absence. In terms of just items related to staff health and wellness, the leave that I'm talking about, so the Families First Corona Response Act provides employees with access to 10 days of paid sick leave if they're sick with COVID or if they have to quarantine, as well as access to leave for childcare. The district added an additional 10 days on top of that federal leave for our staff. So people basically have access to 20 days of sick leave without touching their own sick leave if they need to take leave related to COVID-19. We continue to maintain our commitment to staff that they will not lose pay because they have no sick leave available if they have a COVID-19 related need. Additionally, we're hoping to add staff to each building. This includes multiple substitute teachers who are dedicated to buildings for the year and additional support staff to help with things like supervising students on and off buses, providing support in the office, and elsewhere as needed. Our goal for these substitute teachers are to have these positions posted by the end of this week, and we're looking forward to trying to get as many in place as possible, on average 2 per school. We'll be working on allocating those based on a number of factors depending on staff and the number of requests they have for people who are on some type of a leave. That is a quick overview of some of the staffing considerations that we have going on right now. I think it's back.
Thank you. So to just wrap up on what we are doing today. So you heard our recommendation for a hybrid return to school that includes for our pre-K 5 transitioning to being back in school full time on an October schedule. That's our goal. You also heard our recommendation to delay the start of the school year to September 14th to be able to give us time to process all of the multiple new protocols that we have, make sure that people are familiar with them, be able to prepare ourselves for remote instruction, all of the different things that go with that. And the last thing that I did not mention before, but I know is important for everyone to understand, is that the recommendation that I'm currently making is for this return to school, and that would not change until the trimester or semester break. So Portland High School and Deering High School are on semesters, everybody else is on trimester. So the goal would be for us to remain there so that it's predictable and understood what we're going to do. Obviously, that would change only if we had to scale back our reopening as a result of changes in the prevalence of the virus in our community. But otherwise, we wouldn't be on a biweekly basis looking at the new data from the state and saying, oh, it's still green, so we should move to, full all back, until at least the trimester break. In terms of the process, you know that we had the DOE C2C information last week, which led to the recommendation tonight. After the meeting tonight, the board will have a public hearing to hear from the community in terms of feedback around this. We will have additional follow-up meetings with stakeholders, students, and staff to go over the plan and hear from them. And then our goal is for this to be in front of you on 2 weeks from now at the August 18th meeting. And that obviously could potentially change if the data from the state were different on August 14th. But assuming that there is no change, this would be our recommendation. So I think that concludes our part of this, and we'll just open it up for questions. Before I do that, though, I do want to, I'm sorry, it does not conclude that. I mentioned earlier how grateful I am for the amazing involvement that we've had from our staff and partners in this work. So the next 40 slides, is it, Grace? No, just kidding. I think it's 4 slides, show, over 100 educators, over 130 educators between our administrators and teachers, tons of our support staff that have worked on the different plans for different aspects of this reopening. We would not be able to be here and to have the details and to have the plans without the involvement of all of these folks. So we are incredibly fortunate to have such amazing talent in this community, in this school district, and to have them bring their expertise, their commitment, and their knowledge to this work has been humbling, to say the least. So thank you to all of them, and we look forward to your questions now.
Thank you, Superintendent, and staff for the presentation. Obviously, a lot of information, so I'm sure that there will be questions. So board members, I'll remind you, please use the raise your hand feature on Zoom. I'll call you, and we'll try to address your questions as you bring them up. So if you want to start lining up, go for it.